Hey, Liam. Hey, Rob. So, do you fancy starting a podcast? I don't know, Rob. What are you afraid of? If this thing works out, it will solve all your financial problems. And if it doesn't work, we will have a failed podcast. Come on, Liam, let's do it. Unless you want everyone to think you're chicken. Nobody calls me chicken, Rob. Nobody. All right, prove it. All right. All right, Rob. You want a podcast? Well, here you go. I'm in. Thanks, Liam. I'll see you in the podcast studio tomorrow. Welcome to Hey You Guys podcast. I'm Liam. I'm Rob. This is Liam. And this week we watched Back to the Future Part 2, starring Michael J. No, I can't do this. I can't do an intro this week. It's been on my mind since I rewatched this film. If old Biff went into the past to give the almanac to young Biff, how could he have brought the DeLorean back to the original 2015 timeline? Wouldn't he have arrived in the alternate 2015, which means Doc and Marty are stranded in original 2015, where old Biff just upped and disappeared one day? Also, for all the ideas about the future that is 2015, couldn't we have come up with a better communication method than a connected fax system that prints a fax out in every room of the house at the same time? What is with Doc constantly panicking about anything and everything? I mean, honestly, mate, take a breath. Oh, and finally, is being called a chicken really that bad? I mean, aren't there worse things to be called? Having your life be ruined over and over again for being called a chicken? At some point, you have to learn your lesson. I mean, Liam, wouldn't you learn your lesson?
I think you would. And I mean, I think that is a prime candidate. And I was concerned going into this podcast because, as always, just to explain, I have no idea how you feel about this. You don't know how I feel about this. We're finding out now, live, whatever. I was like, listen, I've rewatched this film. I'm not crazy about it, going back to it. And I thought, oh, you're going to love it. And we have this big disagreements. And I'm not sure if it's a great movie. And that is a perfect example, is the chicken thing. It's fun when you're younger when you watch it, but when you kind of revisit and watch it with a more critical eye, you realize it's just like a really lazy plot device, a narrative device to kind of get around all the timey-wimey stuff, and the fact that they've really written themselves into a corner, which they do over and over again in this movie.
I mean, a lot of people probably class Back to the Future 2 as the best Back to the Future. I'll go on record right now and say, no, it's number one. Number one.
That's not even like anyone who says this is the best film, they're getting caught up in the start of the film. And we've talked about with other films, like, you know, the first film's the best, but you remember bizarrely the stuff from the second film. We talked about was it Beverly Hills Cop and a few others. Yeah. And you remember all the stuff from the second film, but realistically, the first film was always far superior. With this, there's no question. The first film is by far and away, not only is it better than the sequels, it's one of the greatest movies of all time. I would make the argument this film isn't even close to the third film. I think the third film is considerably better than this. And one of the major reasons is, again, it was fun when you're a kid, because when you think back to this film, I think everybody just remembers the start. Everybody remembers the Nike trainers, the hoverboards, Jaws 19. That's what they remember. But realistically, this film is split up into like 4 sections. It's the first section, which is the fun but slightly goofy satirization of future American culture and capitalist society. That's where you get the Nike trainers, the caps, the self-drying coat. That's what everyone remembers. The second section is fucking horrible. Like, not only is it horribly bleak and surprisingly oppressive, but all that stuff is like it's like Escape from New York, but without any of the charm.
Sorry, I know you've got 2 more sections.
No, it's fine.
What, by making Biff rich, turns America into a post-apocalyptic future?
I don't know.
He's rich, that's great. But how, did all of a sudden then, did nobody want to go to school? Stealing newspapers was the worst thing. Also, while we're on it, if it's a post-apocalyptic future, who is still delivering newspapers? And is he delivering newspapers in an armored vehicle?
I don't. Well, that is the thing. I wasn't sure if they were implying that America's fucked or just Hill Valley is fucked, because they have a lot of sections where they're like, "Oh, don't go to this area." So I think I think when you watch it, it almost feels like they're saying America is fucked. But I think the reality is, it's just Hill Valley's fucked because he's built his Trump Tower, Las Vegas style casino. The town's gone to shit. He's got the cops in his pocket, which is referenced. So I'm going to give them the benefit and say it's just Hill Valley rather than the entirety of America. But still, I'm not convinced that Biff getting a bit of money, albeit, okay, a lot of money, is going to send the town that far down the shitter. But my biggest issue is just the fact that the whole section is just unpleasant. Like, I don't like the stuff like Leah Thompson. Like Leah Thompson's character, what's her name? Not
Lorraine.
Jennifer. Lorraine. Thank you, Lorraine. She's in that sequence. It's 1985. She should be about like 46, 47. I know she probably has a drinking problem. She probably smokes too much. She sounds like 78.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. It's just so bleak. And nobody, when they remember Back to the Future 2, remembers that section. Some people remember, like I said, the third section is basically just, oh, remember the first film? We're just doing that with some extra bits. Yeah. It's fine. It's got a slightly underwhelming action sequence at the end in the tunnel, but whatever. My favorite part of the film, bizarrely, is actually the finale. Like, I think when he thinks Doc is dead, and I know I'm jumping straight to the end, but when he thinks the DeLorean's exploded, the guy shows up in the rain, he gives him the letter, he realizes in the Old West, and that bit when he runs around the corner, and it's the end of the first film.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm back from the future, and he passes out. And it's easy now to kind of look back at it and take it for granted, but in 1989, 1990, to see that moment and for it to come up on the screen to be continued, and then no fucking round, for it to go straight into the trailer for the third film was unfucking believable.
Was
unbelievable.
That the first film ever to do next week on Back to the Future or something like that?
I think it was. Yeah. I think it was. But it was so, like, the use, I actually think the use of the score isn't particularly well implemented in this film, certainly compared to the others. Yeah. But in that moment, just the music when he runs around the corner, and of course you're familiar with that sequence already because it's the end of the first one. And he has that kind of back and forth with Doc, and the way it goes directly, like, I thought it was going to be like more like modern movies where maybe you'd have the trailer at the end. The only comparison I could make was the Matrix trilogy when they did Reloaded and Revolutions back to back.
Yeah.
But even with that one, you had to watch until the end of the credits to get the trailer. This one didn't fuck around. It goes straight to be continued and then went straight to the trailer, and it's got the great music and in the Wild West. I'm like, I'm on board.
The version I watched, guessing the version you watch as well, probably all versions, it still has it. And even the version it still has coming summer 1990. Like, it still has everything. They haven't removed it from the... Which
I love.
Yeah. So it's basically, they just kept the original print and they've just shown it to you. Can we go back to the third part? And I know we're jumping everywhere. And
that's fine. Everyone knows the film.
I will say, I am going to talk about things I liked in this film. I didn't just pick up on things that were... confused me or I didn't like, but another part that I didn't like.
Yeah. Well, no, that's fair enough, because I think we all know, let's just be clear, because I feel like we both feel the same way about this. We both like this film.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you go back and watch this with the critical eye, it has a lot of problems. Both, the problem is this one's much more plot heavy than the other movies. There's a lot more timey-wimey stuff, and I think that's one of the major issues we'll get to in a moment. But it just doesn't have the same characters as the other films. I just don't think it's aged as well as 1 and 3 for that reason.
So Doc goes back to 1955 with Marty the second time.
Mm-hmm.
So that Doc is from 1985, so it's 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So in 30 years, he has remembered the exact wrench size to give.
I mean, this is another of those Rob things where you're picking out a really weird issue. I think the fact there, because that did cross my mind, is the fact that he would just know which one to use in that situation.
No, not after 30. Because original Doc, like 1955 Doc says, can you pass me a 3/8? And he said, don't you mean like 4/10 or whatever it is? Like, no.
Right, this is a perfect example of how our brains differ, because I've got a list here. One of my sections is bizarre suspensions of disbelief. And that scene is in it, but it's for a completely different reason. I'm more concerned that this, let's be clear, genius, a slightly, overstressed genius, but a genius nonetheless. He can't tell when he is standing 2 foot away from himself. He doesn't put on a voice.
Nope.
He stands the other side of a lamppost. Like you said, he knows about the wrench. I'm like, dude, how do you not know that's you? And he doesn't even have the excuse of being like, well, why would I be there? He's just fucking built a time machine. He knows this is a possibility. There are numerous, basically, I've got a list here, and it's odd you picked that one, because I've got bizarre suspensions of disbelief that probably drove Rob crazy. So I've got Biff can't hear Marty talking in the back of his car, super loud, insane. I've got there that point about Doc is aware that he's speaking to himself because there is a lamppost in the way. How is he not realizing that? Nobody finds it weird that Marty, dressed as he is standing in the middle of the dance floor with binoculars. Nobody seems to give a shit at the,
the binoculars. As soon as fucking Doc gives Marty the binoculars, it's nighttime. It's 4 a.m. Yeah. He puts them to his eyes and tries to look through them. What the fuck are you seeing in the pitch black, dude?
And they really lean into those binoculars. I'm not sure if they had some kind of like advertising deal with, I don't know, Mr. Binocular, but they use those binoculars a lot. But when he's standing on the dance floor in like the hat, the suit, and he's supposed to be like undercover, like, dude, you just stand in the middle of the dance floor with binoculars. It's the weirdest fucking thing.
And you've just raised a 6-foot aerial as well to talk to Doc. Like, Doc.
Yeah. And right, I did mention that this was my favorite sequence in the film, was like, when he gets the letter delivered. But this one, really, I thought this is a Rob classic. The fact that he can light a match to burn the almanac in that storm is, of all the things that happen in this film, I'm like, there's no fucking way you can light that match in that storm. There's just no way. And also, I'm going to say one more thing. Has anyone ever used the term almanac before or after for anything other than reference to Back to the Future 2?
No. If the word almanac ever comes up, it's in relation to Back to the Future. I've 100%. Never used it any other time.
Yeah. It's just an almanac. Well, that's that thing from Back to the Future. No, I've never seen it in a book. I've never seen it referenced anywhere else other than in reference to this film. I'm not 100% convinced that they didn't just make it up for this fucking movie. And we've all been tricked.
Going back to the Cafe 80s where you had a young Elijah Wood.
Oh, yeah.
Why? I know it's meant to be like, they're in the future, so we're going to give him weird clothes and stuff. Mm-hmm. Why was he wearing a sieve on his head? They literally they painted a sieve green and put it on his head as a hat.
Yeah, they do have the thing is, a lot of the fashion, and we'll get to that in the what's aged well or what was kind of proved to be relatively true and what wasn't, basically. That's a very clumsy way of kind of naming a section. But the hats, like you said, there's the Elijah Wood hat, but I actually have more of an issue with Griff's whatever the fuck he's got on his head.
Cybernetic thing, isn't it? I think it's just because they said it's cybernetic implant. So I think that is actually fused to his skull.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Well, that was another one of my issues with this film, is Griff is easily the worst incantation. That's not the word. Incarnation? Is that the right word? Yeah. He's the worst example of Biff in any of the timelines. I hate the way he speaks. He's got a bizarre intonation, which I don't like. Him and his whole gang are just horrible in 2015
as well.
Jason Scott Lee, and he has the worst line. Like, one of my biggest issues with this film is that it's goofier than the other films.
Yeah.
And his line delivery, he gets one line, and my God, does Jason Scott Lee swing for the fucking rafters.
Sorry, not Jason Scott Lee. Do you know his name in that film?
No.
Whitey.
Oh, it is Whitey, yeah.
It's Whitey.
I do have it written down, yeah. Jesus Christ.
Right. But you're right, his line, unless you have power. Whatever. Oh, my God.
The thing is, my issues with this film actually started right at the beginning, and it's the fact that the film starts with the end of the second film starts with the end of the first film. And I know they do that in Rocky, obviously, quite regularly, where, the first thing you see is like a montage from the end of the last fight.
Yeah.
The only thing here, it's as if like Apollo Creed is now played by Bill Duke, but everyone's just pretending that everything's fine. Like, it's really odd at the start seeing Claudia Wells replaced by Elizabeth Shue as Jennifer Parks.
Yeah.
Because, don't get me wrong, I love Elizabeth Shue, as we've mentioned on previous podcasts like Karate Kids, massive crush from the 80s.
Yeah.
But she is never convincing as Jennifer Parks. She looks like she's gone to a fancy dressed as Jennifer Parks. I just never buy, like, the hair, the outfit. She never looks like a real human being.
No, it's such a contradiction. She looks so uncomfortable in any scene she's in within that film. It's just, it doesn't work for me, the whole Elizabeth Shue as Jennifer. And I'm with you, mind. I've always been a big fan of Elizabeth Shue, but it just seems like she was Shue.
Here we go. You can't help it now. You've gone down that road.
She was shoehorned into this film.
Well, that's one of the issues. And I don't want to blame Elizabeth Shue. I mean, the fact that she looks weird is one thing, but the biggest issue is the fact that at the end of the first film, they obviously didn't know, despite the fact that they leave the door open, they thought it was going to be a one and done.
Yeah.
Like, it was almost like a little nod to the audience. As, oh, look, there could be the ongoing adventures of I was going to say Rick and Morty, of Marty and Doc. But realistically, they didn't have any plans for 2 and 3 when they made 1. Obviously, it turned into a mega hit. And they've basically written themselves into a corner because they've got all this plot to deal with, all this character to deal with, and they clearly, fuck. Jennifer is in the car going to the future. She has to go to the future, but we don't want to deal with Jennifer. And they spend the rest of the film trying so hard to abandon Jennifer at every turn. They're like, listen,
how many
just
times
got no
is that
time.
poor girl just going to go to sleep?
I know. And she'll just forget. And it kind of leans into the other issue of this film is so often, you can feel itself writing its way out of a corner. Yeah. And like you said, the chicken thing at the top of the podcast, that was one of the major things where you can feel the writing happening. And because obviously time travel is a big part of the whole trilogy, that goes without saying. But the first film is really a film about nostalgia. It's about 1955 in the same way that number 3, remove all the timey-wimey stuff, it's a film about the Old West. The second film, this one, I know it's about the future, but really, this is the timey-wimey film in the trilogy.
Yeah, this is the one that's like trying to connect all those plot threads.
Yeah,
to get it all. Yeah, no, I totally.
But the problem with that is it totally comes at the cost of the core relationship which makes the trilogy, and it's Marty and Doc. Like, Jennifer, whatever, she gets booted to the side. That's one thing. But in this film, it never feels like we get the Marty and Doc kind of relationship that we get in the other films. And I know this film is Marty's film in the same way that the third film is Doc's film. Yeah. But the third film never does it at the expense of Marty's relationship with Doc. Whereas this film, it feels like if Jennifer is completely abandoned, I feel like Doc is at least pushed to the side, which is a shame.
Do you know the best thing I noticed about this film, and then you look at it in part 3 as well, is how versatile Thomas F. Wilson is as Biff Griff.
He's so good. I mean, I know I don't like Griff, but he's great as everything else. He's great as old man Biff.
But what I mean is, it's him, but also it might not be him. Like you see him then as, and I know it's not the part 3 film. We'll talk about that when we finally do cover part 3. But he looks completely different as Mad Dog Tannen. When you see the picture, he looks completely different.
He does. As Mad Dog Tannen. He's great. And just be clear, I know I mentioned the fact that I don't like him as Griff. I love him as Old Man Biff. Yeah, I love him as 1950s Biff, and I adore him as Mad Dog Tannen.
But even as old, I guess as Rich Biff, we'll call him then.
Oh yeah.
The way he changes, like as old Biff, then he's got the hunch down. He looks tiny. Again, him against young Biff from 1950s, where young Biff is a strapping lad. He's tall. I mean, if he wasn't a complete and utter, well, I guess rapist douchebag, he would be a handsome man. And then but then how he changes, he's so versatile. Thomas F. Wilson is great in this.
He is, and you really see it in the alternative 1985 section when he has that sit down when basically Marty tells him that he knows about the almanac and stuff. And he says, come on, kid, let's have a talk. And for a minute there's a genuine rapport back and forth. And you can almost see that kind of like that Trumpian charm comes through. And you're just like, wait a minute, Biff is actually like maybe like once you get behind the scenes and you can talk to him man to man, he's actually okay. And then 2 minutes later, he pulls a gun and says, I'm going to kill you with the same gun that I killed your old man with. You're like, oh, no. He is the fucking worst. But that charm totally shines through. And yeah, he's fantastic. He's the secret MVP. Like, obviously, the MVP is a Doc and Marty, but he is such an important part of the trilogy.
Go back a minute before they're on the roof and he's threatening to kill him with the same gun that killed his dad. When they're in the office, the entire film, that section could have ended right there if Marty killed him with that that ashtray that had ninja stars on it. Or
yeah, it was a little bit of a odd job / random task situation, wasn't
it? Yeah, I love this ashtray. We have to have an ashtray. That's great. Why is every, I wanted to say corner of the ashtray, but it was circular. But they just had random sharp points on it for no reason other than to...
Yeah, it was very dangerous, wasn't it? But I don't know. The thing is, right, at this point, it does feel like we are shitting on this film. And I will continue to shit on this film to a certain extent. However, it should be mentioned, the reason that everybody our age in particular has such a soft spot for this film and remembers it so fondly is that for the longest time, this was our generation's de facto image of the future.
Yes.
Like, obviously, there was stuff like nobody wanted to think of the future as Blade Runner. Nobody wanted that bleak shit. And obviously the alternative 1985 is probably a little bit too closer to our actual timeline in 2023. But in terms of when we were growing up, what we envisioned the future of 2015 was going to look like, and what we judged everything that happened subsequently, other than maybe the hands-free stuff from Minority Report, which became a part of our lives in the early 2000s, this was it. Yeah. And it's because whatever we might say about the rest of the film, that section, despite being goofy, is just cool as shit. Like, when I was growing up, that cap, I so wanted that cap. The coat is kind of lame. Those trainers are still maybe the coolest trainers of all time.
I love how you went to the cap first and not the trainers.
Well, the cap was the weird one. Everybody loves the trainers. Everybody, and I think I mentioned it on Facebook in the build-up to this. I'd make an argument that the trainers, and combined with the hoverboard, might be the coolest movie props of all time. And I think they're definitely in the conversation. Nobody mentions the cap because the cap hasn't aged well. But in the early 90s, I remember being like, I fucking want that cap. And, you know, like, odd things can kind of like influence your decisions on what you think are cool when you were younger. Yeah. There used to be a video store at the end of my road. Okay. And there was a guy and he was a young guy, I think he was like late teens, early 20s, who run the video store. And of course, to my mind, when I was 12 years old, that was the coolest thing in the world. Like this guy having his own video shop. And he had the Marty McFly cap. So that just like elevated it. I was like, oh my God, one day I might grow up, I might own a video store, I could have the Marty McFly cap. So I just thought it was the coolest fucking thing ever. So yeah, odd how your brain works in those regards, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. You talk about Elizabeth Shue, right, being replaced. Can we mention the George McFly in the room, or the not George McFly?
The Jeffrey Wiseman in the room.
The Jeffrey Wiseman in the room. They put chin prosthetics on him, and then they thought, oh, people might still recognize that this isn't Crispin Glover, so let's turn him upside down.
I tell you what, though, it fucking worked.
Yeah,
I did not realize when I was younger that wasn't Crispin Glover.
To the point where there is now like a Crispin Glover rule in the Screen Actors Guild, isn't there, where you can't actually replace an actor and make them look like that other actor.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they obviously did a lot of, kind of the use of the original film in the final, well, the third part, as we're calling it, of this movie, where they go back to 1955 and it's Enchanted Under the Sea Magic Dance, whatever it's called. I always get the
Enchantment Under the Sea Dance. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And they obviously just use old footage, and there's a few shots from him behind where it's obviously Wiseman again. But like I said, when I was younger, I didn't even recognize that he wasn't in it. I just thought it was him. So it was very, very well done. Obviously, when you look a little bit closer now, you're like, okay, I can see. Like you said, the fact that if we put him upside down, people won't notice. It sounds ridiculous, but I didn't fucking notice. So it worked unbelievably.
You said as well, that was a good scene where you see Marty from 1955 talking to George and I forgot her name now, Lorraine. But you got Marty outside then being confronted by Biff. It made me think that I listened to a podcast that they're friends of ours, the Hey You Guys, we're the Hey You Guys podcast.
That is us, yes.
The Staring at Ghost podcast. They just covered Back to the Future Part 1. I was listening to it and they brought something up that I wish we would have.
Yeah. Don't you throwing us under the bus, Jesus Christ.
I am throwing us under the bus from Back to the Future Part 1, where they named their kid Marty after this Marty they met, but not just any kid. For some reason, they waited till their third one, their second boy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Much of an impact on their life. But when I listened to that, I thought, why the fuck didn't we pick that up? That's a great shout from those guys.
That is a great shout. And also, I mean, I think we may have actually brought this up, but the big issue there is, say you're the husband, you're the father, and your wife tells you, I want to name our third kid after that guy I wanted to fuck in high school.
Yeah.
I'm like, how about no, you crazy fucking
And also,
bitch.
As they said, when he grows up then, he looks like that guy from high school.
Yeah, which is also creepy. Although, let's be clear, right, that's creepy. Obviously, Lorraine wanting to have sex with her son, super creepy. Is it really creepier than Michael J. Fox playing his own daughter? Because I find that...
I had that written down and I thought that is the weirdest fucking thing I have seen yet.
I mean, was he? All I could think is that he's seen Coming to America or something like that, and being like, I can do that. I can play like a whole bunch of characters. I'm kind of stretching myself. But him playing a female version or his own daughter is creepy. And the worst part is they feel the need to give him a really short skirt. Now, Michael J. Fox isn't a big guy, but in that moment, it's like he has surprisingly muscular legs. It's very, very upsetting. I'm just like,
but I wonder.
It's brief for sure, but I'd prefer it if maybe they just, I don't know, hired a girl.
I do wonder if Robert Zemeckis was doing this and he thought, "Ooh, you know what? I let Michael J. Fox do this, but we're not going to concentrate much on the daughter. You see her face, and then for most of it, then she's either got some glasses on her face, or these like you see it from behind, and it's just a weird Michael J. Fox talking voice. And so Robert Zemeckis might have thought, "Ooh, yeah, no, that's not good."
He's just not convincing as a girl. And as I said, it kind of comes back to that larger issue again of the fact that of all three films, this one, like all three movies have like a sense of goofiness about them for sure. This one easily feels the goofiest. And like the stuff with, I guess it'll be Marty when he's older, the stuff with Flea. I mean, is anybody trusting a guy called, what's his name? Like fucking Nails? Or
Douglas J. Needles.
Needles. I mean, a guy called Needles who fucking looks like Flea, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do a business deal. Then the slightly racist, albeit a term I've used so many times with my friend, McFry.
I wanted to continue my intro, but I couldn't think, without it sounding terrible, of how I would bring that into a podcasting where some guy just shouts at you.
That's how I should do like business meetings. Just pop onto Zoom, McFry, and everyone's just like, "Who the hell's McFry?"
It's honestly terrible. But again, they have everything. If they have these screens, obviously projector screens now, we have them, and you had this weird TV where he could have 900 channels and watch them at the same time. But then the thing that you have, but apparently all hoverboards, flying cars, converting your old car into a flying car, but we're still using faxes.
Well, that is the weird thing. And obviously, I think it did exist in an early form at that point. But when you look back at all these movies from like the 80s and even the early 90s, the two things they couldn't get their head around were the existence of the internet and maybe even kind of mobile phones being as powerful as they are. So it always kind of gets stretched out into like numerous forms of technology. And a perfect example is that the fax machine. The fact that, like you mentioned at the top, you don't just get a fax, you get a fax in every room. Like, what the fuck is that about? It's absolutely bonkers. But
why have you got a fax? Why have you got a fax in the cupboard?
It's so dumb. It's so dumb. But this film does get a lot right. Like, if you look back over this film, and we're very much talking about the first section of this film when he goes back to the future, or just to the future for the first time, whatever you want to call it. But there's the 80s nostalgia and retro stores, definitely a thing. There's the self-tying laces. That's a tricky thing because there's a chicken and egg thing. Does that exist because of this film? Maybe. I don't know. But it is a thing. There's no Jaws 19. But there is, I will take it as a kind of a more as like a successful commentary on the nature of perpetual sequels. So we'll give them their dues there.
Furious 10 and 11.
Exactly. It's not far from Jaws 19. Glass 3D, it didn't prove hugely popular, but that is absolutely a thing. And obviously, I think in New York now, isn't it? There's that billboard which looks 3D.
It looks fantastic.
That actually looks really fucking cool. Actually looks better than this. 90s looking clothing. I know, like you said, he's wearing a sieve on his head, but there is that kind of 90s futuristic style, which is, I don't know, all the kids are wearing 90s stuff now. What can you do? I mentioned our future obsession with nostalgia. Peloton bikes, albeit in a restaurant. The Cubs didn't win the World Series in 2016. They were only 1 year late. And for those who aren't into baseball, the reason that was a thing in this film is the Cubs hadn't won the World Series since 1908. So them not winning it was a big thing. And obviously in this film, they win it in 2015. They were 1 year off. And the team they were playing was Miami. And I'm not sure, I don't think they named them. It looks like maybe they'd be the Miami Gators. And that's why Marty goes Miami. It's because Miami didn't have a baseball team. But they did get a baseball team in 1993, albeit they're called the Marlins rather than the Gators. There's also flat screen TVs and voice control, arty screensavers. My TV totally has arty screensavers, Zoom calls. So they actually get a lot right in this film. Obviously, there's a long list of what they got wrong as well.
I really wanted. I watched it again last night, and I really wanted. That Pepsi bottle looks fucking fantastic.
Did they briefly release that? I want to believe that they did.
I wanted to believe that was a thing, that maybe I can get hold of it.
Is it Pepsi Pure? Is that what it's called?
Well, Pepsi Classic they called it then, didn't they?
In the restaurant, but I think I'm sure it had a name like Pepsi Pure, and then I was starting to think, is that the equivalent of like Pepsi Zero or something like that, where it tastes like Pepsi but it doesn't have sugar? So we'll give that one as a win as well.
I just wanted that bottle. That bottle was fantastic.
That's the thing. The bottle was cool, and I don't think I really mentioned it. Like, I know everyone remembers the trainers and everyone remembers the coat. The one thing I noticed this time is how fucking cool the bag is. The bag that the trainers is fucking awesome. It becomes
see-through.
Yeah. It's so cool. Nobody ever mentions that bag. That bag is awesome.
Oh, the fact in the future, all the kids turn their pockets inside out.
Yeah, that's not... I mean, I've got a list here. Wrong. Flying cars, wearing your pockets inside out. That doesn't happen. Self-drying clothes. Clear ties. Not having that. Double ties. Fuck that. That didn't happen. The abolishment of all lawyers sounds very Judge Dredd to me.
Yeah.
The future. Like, kind of tried and killed on the spot. I don't know. Hoverboards. I do have it down here as Pepsi Pure, so I'm not sure if that is a thing or not. I'm actually going to put that into the right. I'm going to assume that's the equivalent of kind of like sugarless Pepsi.
Yeah.
What's the Pepsi Max? Fucking hell,
Max.
Jesus Christ.
Do you know unless you have power line with and he's got the Mad Dog hoverboard. Where's the power coming from?
I don't know. A very small battery. Future batteries, clearly.
Yeah. Because that's got the equivalent of a jet engine on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of many contrivances in this movie, I suppose. But that sequence, again, I remember it being really cool, but then as an action sequence, it's kind of underwhelming.
Yeah, he looks so uncomfortable swinging a baseball bat, doesn't he?
He doesn't look like an athlete. Like, some people just look like athletes on screen. Other people just don't. It's kind of like Marty McFly in Teen Wolf. I just don't buy it. Well, I don't buy anyone in that film in Teen Wolf as a basketball player. Whereas you watch other films, you're like, yeah, I buy him. Keanu Reeves in anything. Like, he just looks like a fucking athlete. Yeah. Biff looks the part, but when he starts swinging that bat, you're just like, nah, I'm not fucking having that. No way.
Telescopic baseball bats, by the way.
Yeah, a little bit much. I guess they could create them, but again, that's a pointless creation, I suppose. That kind of falls into that. But then, like you mentioned the bit with Elijah Wood, there's also, he's playing the arcade machine, and he's like, oh, you use your hands.
That's a baby's toy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like he lives in a world where Xbox Connect won the console wars, where that was like the new de facto. Like make no mistake, around 2015, that was almost a thing. It was like people forget, like the Switch, and then there was PlayStation, whatever the fuck it was, and Xbox Connect, and they were. I don't think that's the official name, PlayStation, whatever the fuck it was called, but that was what they were all pushing towards, this kind of hand-free waggle gaming, whatever you want to call it. And like, even I think after Connect, there was like an E3 press conference when they did like the hologram stuff, the AR. That was another thing which felt very futuristic, but it's all just kind of gone away in the same way that 3D did. But they weren't a million miles off. That's for sure.
We talk about, and I think we briefly mentioned it when we did the first part of Back to the Future. Can we talk about the creepy friendship between a very old man and a 17-year-old boy to the point where he went to the future, but he's really invested in Marty's family?
Yeah, I mean, I never found their relationship creepy. I always found it odd that Marty would want to be friends with Doc because he seems popular. That's one of the things I could never quite figure out. Is he popular?
No, so I think he's a clique jumper.
Okay.
He's comfortable in every clique. Like he was a musician.
You're thinking him as very much like a Ferris Bueller.
Yeah, he's Switzerland, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
nobody's best friends with him, but everyone kind of likes him.
Yeah, exactly. He can get on with everybody. He hasn't rubbed anybody the wrong way. He's a rocker. He's a skateboarder. I don't know.
I'm sure he's probably on the basketball team. He's probably like okay at sports.
Yeah.
He probably just, like you say, he probably just fits in everywhere, but without ever really being committed to like a best friend or a certain group. I totally get that.
He has an after school, I guess, relationship with a very old man.
Yeah, but he's also got a hot girlfriend. It is a bit of a mystery, but my biggest issue is more the fact that Doc is so painfully irresponsible. You mentioned the fact that he's, for lack of a better term, a bit of a busy cunt. Like, he's always like stressing out kind of thing. He's just never chilled. like he's constantly telling Marty about like, oh, the rules, don't run into your future self, don't do this, don't do that. Yeah, like basically all he's got is a newspaper from the future which says, oh, your son will go to prison. Surely he could just bring the newspaper back, say, listen, we're just going to make sure you don't get into that car accident, don't do anything stupid. And then the newspaper would just change. But instead he's like, no, let's go to the future. We'll take Jennifer. We'll leave her in the car. I'll go meet my future self. You go fuck around over here. It's like Doc is so painfully irresponsible. But he does have that scientist thing about him, because I've met, my wife is a scientist, so I've met a lot of scientists, and they do have...
Say, well, I met my wife a week ago.
No, my wife's not too bad at it, but I've met a lot of the other ones where they're clearly very clever in the same way that Doc is. Yeah. But what they're lacking, because they've got so much of their brain going down this route, whether it be science or whether it be creating a time-traveling DeLorean, that their common sense has been switched off. Their social skills don't exist. So they say really dumb shit for really smart people. And I think that's the case with Doc. So I'm going to give him the benefit there.
I'm still trying to figure out why he's so invested in Marty's family in the future, though. But also... Yeah.
Well, he's got no one else.
Where's future Doc?
That's a good point. Where is future Doc?
Like, Doc, from 1985 to 2015, has he died? Has he moved? Like, where is future Doc?
Yeah, there's no reference to him at all, is there? No, so he's just buggered off. We just never find out.
Everyone else.
There's not enough time for future Doc. There's already just too much goddamn plot going on. There's 17 different Martys at this point, and I mean we've hardly mentioned the third section. I mean, it's so like ridiculously contrived.
Well, back to 1955.
Yeah, but it's still fun because it is 1955 and all that stuff is so iconic. And the way they do kind of force themselves into those situations is kind of fun, I guess. Yeah. But again, when people think of this film, I don't think anybody even remembers that. I think everybody just remembers the fucking the hoverboard and the trainers. I think that everyone who says they love Back to the Future 2, I'm like, what you love about it? I was like, oh, well, there's fucking trainers and the hoverboards. Like, can you remember anything else about the movie? I don't think anyone can.
Are you that invested in the fact you had to pay $300 to have your car renewed or stop smelling of horse shit, that you're not going to notice the lumpy blanket in your back seat?
I know. I mean, that comes under bizarre suspensions of disbelief. I should have put that one in. And then that bizarre lumpy blanket stands up behind you and just starts screaming down a microphone. How can you not hear him, you idiot?
He's so dumb. And he pulled out again the 6-foot aerial. Doc, 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 I'm in the car. Do you hear something? No, it's fine. Doc, Doc, Doc.
No, it's absolutely fine. I don't know. Like I said, like to me, when I think about this film, it feels like the Return of the Jedi, the Back to the Future trilogy, in the same way that when I was younger, I loved Return of the Jedi. And I still like Return of the Jedi. But when you watch it as a grown-up, you're like, oh, it's a bit goofy, isn't it? It's a bit silly. There are Ewoks and stuff. And this film feels like that. Like, when you're younger, you love it because of all the flashing lights, all the future stuff. And it is fun. And don't get me wrong, it's super ambitious. We haven't given it enough credit for that. This second movie is arguably the most ambitious of all three films. But it does come at the cost of character development and relationships, etc. But it is super ambitious. In the same way, whatever you might say about Return of the Jedi, also super ambitious. It basically created the template for future blockbusters.
Well, that's the thing. Back to the Future 1 is more the adult-orientated. Well, as an adult now, we gravitate more towards Back to the Future 1. But as kids, it was definitely Back to the Future 2. It was the flashier one. It was the one... I mean, flying cars. Again, hoverboard. Again, going back to... Everything. It was more for us then as we were growing up because 1989 and 1990, and I have very fond memories of of Back to the Future 3 because we used to go to Treckle Bay Porthcawl Caravan Park.
Oh yeah.
Every summer, my mum would take me and my brother for 2 weeks, and they had in Treckle Bay they had a cinema, and that's when I first went to the cinema and I first got to watch Back to the Future Part 3. So I have fond memories of Back to the Future Part 3. But yeah, this one was definitely more kid-orientated. And I think that's where they thought, we can get kids into this. And when you get like Back to the Future Part 3, then you have flying trains and stuff like that. And it's just, those two are more for as a child growing up. But as we grow up and we get more critical eye, I guess, number one is definitely where you start seeing all the nuances and things like that. And you start to enjoy that film a lot more. But it's definitely changed. My feelings on this have definitely changed from I used to love this film. I thought it was great too. it's all right, but there are a lot of things that you start to question more as an adult.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think realistically, like you said, when you're younger, you love it for those I think everyone loves it for the same kind of reasons. I think as a grown-up, I don't think most people have that. I think everyone kind of accepts now that number one is the best film. There'll be a couple of outliers, but I think objectively, number one is easily the best film in the trilogy. Yeah. Like I said, I think the big conversation now is what's better, 2 or 3? And for years, I just kind of assumed by default that 2 was still better than 3.
Yeah.
And as I said, it was only when I went back and watched them, and it wasn't even so much, 2 was disappointing when I revisited it. It was the fact that 3 was so much better than I remembered. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't hold a candle to the first film, and it has its own problems. But as I said, it's because the relationship is back on Doc and Marty, which really is, if you remove all the trimmings and everything, that's the thing that drives the trilogy. And as I said, I love Mad Dog Tannen at the end of that film. I love the fact that the emphasis on the narrative is more on Doc than on Marty for a change. And I just think fundamentally, even though, and again, for kids in the 80s and stuff, the idea of going back to the Old West wasn't nearly as exciting as going to this like future with hoverboards and stuff like that. It is just fundamentally a better made movie, I think, the third one. So I think this is, while comfortably the weakest film in the trilogy, it's still the most ambitious. It's still really fun. It still has hoverboards, awesome night trainers, great caps, awesome bags. But it does have a long list of issues, this film. And that's why I put it as the weakest. But let's be clear, it's still an amazing trilogy. With these films, it's always relative. It's kind of like, don't get me wrong, this film's better than Godfather Part 3, but everyone talks about Godfather Part 3 like it's the worst film in the world. It's not the worst film in the world. It's just so much worse than the first 2, which just happen to be 2 of the greatest films ever made. So it's being judged, against what's come before. And judging against the first film and even the third film, it falls short, but it's still fun despite the fact that we've spent the last hour and God knows how long basically tearing it to fucking shreds.
We do this podcast, you watch it through a critical eye. That's not to take anything away from the enjoyment you have with the film.
100%.
But this would be a boring podcast if you went, yeah, it was great. I have nothing to say about the film. Right, move on.
Well, the thing is, I think the reason that this film lives so strongly in people's memory is the fact that it starts well and it ends well. The strongest parts of this film are unquestionably the opening sequence in the future and the ending where they go back to the 50s, and then obviously the bit where, like I said, my favorite sequence when he goes to see Doc back in 55 and it goes straight into the trailer for the third film. It's the middle section, which I find genuinely an unpleasant watch. In the same way, and I know you're not necessarily a Star Wars guy, I'm one of these people who loves The Last Jedi. But there's a middle section when they go to a space casino, which is genuinely bad. This reminds me of that, like an unpleasant 30 minutes in a movie that I otherwise enjoy. And for the most part, I feel like I'm picking holes in a film I otherwise like. But just be clear, the alt 1985 section, I don't enjoy at all. I really don't enjoy that section.
It seems like they went, the alternate 1985 thing seems like they went way too far. It just... Again, it becomes post-apocalyptic. Like Strickland is now just his character from
He-Man, Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, he's just basically that character now and things like that. Like
he's in fairness, he's the only bit of that I like. But I think I just enjoy watching Strickland be a dick. That's about it.
Yeah. I mean, he's a dick in everything, isn't he? James Tolkien. It's the second film in a row that we've done James Tolkien.
I know. Well, that's the thing. I don't, like you said, I have the exact same issue. Like Strickland is so over the top in a very over the top sequence. But I think I just like seeing James Tolkien on screen, just being like James Tolkien is basically the same character in every film, except for maybe in, funny enough, Dick Tracy. But I think it's just a lack of screen time. I think if we'd given him another 20 minutes, he would have eventually pulled a shotgun on someone. Yeah, I think so.
You mentioned Leah Thompson in the alternate 1985. She was she was meant to be in her 40s, but she was like, she looked 70, but her chest was 18.
The whole chest thing, I'm not sure how well that's aged. No. It's such a shame because Leah Thompson and Elizabeth Shue are 2 of like my biggest crushes from the 80s, and both of them look pretty grim in this film. They're doing everything they can to make them look unpleasant in these movies. Yeah,
they had a rough go in this film.
In fairness, they don't do it on purpose with Jennifer when she's younger. She's supposed to just look like Jennifer, but she just looks weird. She just never looks right with the hair, with the outfit and stuff. All of a sudden, it like I said, it looks like fancy dress. And that's going to be a weird way for us to end talking about this film, but that's where we are. That's where we are. One more. All right, go for it, dude.
Because we can't end like that. Do you agree that old Biff should have ended up in alternate 2015 if he went back to change.
I see what you mean. The thing is, as you were saying it, I was like, fuck, I'm going to have to think about that. My biggest, like, does he die when he comes back? Does he just have like a heart attack? Because he comes back with the DeLorean and it's like, wait, is he dying? I couldn't figure it out.
Also, is the DeLorean...
I love it's like, you're the same as me. I also don't have the answer, so I'm going to keep asking more questions until we finally have an answer.
Is the DeLorean so messed up already that you're not going to notice the dings because he reversed it into a fucking step?
Yeah. Pretty clumsy. I guess maybe the situation was quite intense, so we'll give it that. But yeah, the whole Biff thing coming back to that timeline, I'm not convinced that makes sense. And I'm also not sure if whether old Biff just comes back. And again, because they need to take him off the table, he just fucking dies of a heart attack when he gets out of the car.
Or the fact he can actually just use a time machine.
Yeah, that's another major issue. Sorry, I did have that down in my notes. The fact that he just gets into a flying DeLorean and is like, oh yeah, I need to get us up to 88 pretty swift and I'll just go back to that timeline.
Yeah, I know exactly where to go to the same exact moment that Marty McFly already had been.
And well, that kind of leads into one of the other issues. They do deal with it in the film in that kind of like, well, if we bring it up, it's not that bad. The fact that Biff picked November the 12th, 1985 specifically.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think he says, like, is it a junction point for space-time continuum or is it just coincidence? And I think the reality is, I think it's just bad writing. Like, that is the reality of it. He just by chance goes back to that same spot in 1985, gives him the almanac, comes back, has a heart attack on the spot. These are all those weird things in this film where you're like, wait, why is this happening? There's no reason other than the fact that we don't have time to deal with this and it's just too plot heavy. So we do have an answer for that one, but the other two are going to go suspiciously unanswered, I think.
How is the kid?
Oh, there we go. So many questions.
Shit, right?
2 hours of questions now.
They picked up Jennifer and they took her to Hill Valley, which apparently is a bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. How is the kid? And apparently they picked her up in the daytime. And then when they dropped her off, it was night. So it's quite a fair way away, apparently.
Yeah. Not sure about that, but yeah.
How's the kid traveling? How's Marty McFly Jr., who was in there, traveling home as well? Is there, like, is he going to get a taxi? Because the taxi as well, Biff owed the guy like £100 or $100.
Yeah, sounds about right for 2023.
so how is he traveling?
I don't know.
Kid getting back?
Yeah, he just gets it. Well, just assume there's a bus. I don't know. I'm just going to go with, my answer is a bus. That's all I've got.
Right. I can't ask any more questions.
Well, that is the thing. This film does bring up more questions than it does answers, as you can tell by this podcast. But in terms of favorite scenes, I've already kind of mentioned it is very much the final sequence of Marty running back around the corner. You know, it's basically just a retelling of it's weird because the start of this film is the end of the first film, and then the end of the second film is also the end of the first film. But like I said, with the music and the to be continued, I just love that. But it really does start with when Doc gets hit by lightning. And I can't remember the name of the actor, but he's fantastic when he pulls up in the car in the rain. I'm not sure if you'd read a letter like that in the pouring rain. I think you'd take a bit more care with it. But I love that whole sequence, the fact that maybe it's just because it's all leading to what is ultimately a better movie, but that's my favorite sequence.
I can't watch that guy now without thinking, jackass! Do you want to go to Red Lobster?
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I know the guy you're on about. My favorite scene, you actually called it pretty ropey. Is the tunnel scene?
Really?
I enjoyed that scene. I thought it was quite good. The little action thing with the hoverboard and how they filmed that in like 1989, and it made it look realistic. And I just
thought it looked a bit slow. That was my big issue. Yeah. I thought it just looked a bit slow.
Pink hoverboard.
Yeah, I guess it's not much fun if he's on a pink hoverboard and Biff just runs him over and he's just dead.
Yeah.
And I think Biff, and I don't even think Biff would revel in it. I think Biff would see Marty's mangled remains and suddenly be like, oh shit, I've gone too far. I've finally gone too far. He's going to get out the country. I don't know.
I love how Marty grabs a hoverboard, instinctively knows how to use it by just moving his foot in the air.
Yeah. Well, the more important question is, why is his hoverboard cooler than the ones with the engines? Like Biff and his gang all have these big, huge, masculine-looking hoverboards with, power, as they say. And I'm like, why do I want the Marty one? It just looks cooler, the pink one. It's like a little girl's scooter, but for some reason, break that off and just turn it into a hoverboard. It just looks fucking dope to this day. Yeah. It's so cool.
The Western Union guy his name is Joe Flaherty, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, he kind of like, one of those like, just bring him in. He's going to do one scene. He's going to be absolutely awesome, and he's going to leave. Mission accomplished. In terms, yeah, Love's Doc and Marty relationship, not explored as successfully as in other movies, but still the backbone of the movie. Number 2, it's successful satirization of American culture. Number 3, it has to be the Night Trainer's cap, hoverboard, and yes, the bag. They really have to be the coolest movie props of all time. And I'm going to sneak in number 4, the lead into the third movie. The fact that it just didn't feel like it'd ever been done before. And in 1989, 1990, that was super exciting.
Yeah. Number 1, Tom Wilson. Not Tom Wilson playing rapey Biff, but the fact that Tom Wilson is able to just take all the Biff, Griff, all of them, old Biff and everything, and just completely change his mannerisms and everything as he's any different character. I think he's probably the MVP of part 2. Like
I think he is. I actually think this is the weakest performance of both Marty and Doc, or Michael J. Fox, and Christopher Lloyd in this film. I think he steals this film, especially as old. Like I said, I don't actually like him as Griff, but as older Biff, and as in 1985 old Biff, and as 1955 Biff, like he plays 4 distinctly different characters who are all basically the same. They aren't the same person because they're different members of the timeline. But he's, 3 out of 4. That's a pretty good batting average. So we'll allow Griff to be shit. But I think you are right. I think he might be the MVP of this movie.
My second one, we haven't mentioned it much, is the DeLorean. The DeLorean in part 2 is the classic DeLorean look that you remember. Like you say, you think of the DeLorean. It's definitely part 2.
Thank God you brought that up. That would have been so egregious of us to go all the way through a podcast on Back to the Future 2 and not mention the flying fucking DeLorean. Yes, the flying DeLorean is amazing, and you are absolutely bang on. This is like 2015 Back to the Future 2 is our de facto image of the future. When we think of the DeLorean, really what we're picturing is Back to the Future Part 2 DeLorean, 100%.
And I have the Lego model of the DeLorean. Of course, I have the Lego model of it.
Of course you do.
And you can actually build, or you can make it look like all 3. But obviously,
that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I have it as the second one, and
you would.
That is the classic DeLorean look for me. Like now, if you think of the DeLorean, you think of it as having the Mr. Fusion thing on the top, the fact the wheels come under so they can fly off, and we went through this entire hour and 20 odd minutes, not mentioning
the DeLorean. This is insane. The coolest movie car in history. And this, like you said, is the coolest interpretation of that car. The most iconic interpretation of that car, for sure.
Yeah.
It's not just the DeLorean from Back to the Future is the best movie car of all time. It's the one from Back to the Future 2 specifically. Another reason that this movie is awesome, that it has all that visual pop, that, it is fun. It's just dumb as well, that's all.
Yeah. And finally, I like the 1955 section, the 1955 revisit, because it's fun to see them put Marty in then into these sections that you already revisited, you already have from the first film. Like when he just travels under the car as his past self is talking to his mum and things like that, and knocking Biff out after Biff already got knocked out, things like that. It's a fun little section to see. I like the 1955 section.
And I think the important thing is, because we were talking before we started this podcast about the new final Fast and Furious 10 trailer. Yeah. And you mentioned the fact that how much you hate them revisiting previous films and saying, oh, I was secretly there the whole time and stuff. Yeah. The important thing this one does is that he doesn't do anything to impact what happened then. That is all set in stone. If anything, he's trying his hardest not to impact what he's already done in the first film. And that's the important difference there, I think.
Everything you see is after the fact. It's already happened in like Biff got knocked out in the first film. You don't go back to Biff. You don't see it. But in this one, you see what happened to Biff after.
But it's not impacting. Like basically, if you remove everything he does in the second film and his revisits 1955, it doesn't impact what Marty did when he went back to 1955 in the first film, because he's basically just trying his hardest not to impact it, which makes it a really interesting thing. It's like, well, I've already gone back and impacted this, and if I fuck this up now, it's going to change the timelines again. So it makes it a really interesting retelling where you've got the first film going on and you're aware of it, but this isn't impacting it. This is like a different narrative that just happens to be happening at the same time and place, which is, like you say, why that works and why Fast and Furious 10 isn't going to fucking work, basically.
And I'm gonna add a fourth, the fact we didn't mention it at all. Billy Zane.
Oh, yeah, Billy. Well, again, when I think of Billy Zane in this film, I think of him as the 2015 Billy Zane, and I don't like his gang in 2015 at all. But he does get his moments
Billy Zane's not in 2015.
Is he not in that section?
No.
Is it a different gang again?
Yeah, I know. So you have Jason Scott Lee. You have
it is.
The guy played Data. There's a guy called Data. So no, Billy Zane is in the 1955 and the 1985 sections.
As Match or something like that.
Yeah. Right. I love him in the 1955 section where they go, he's up on stage and Billy Zane just goes, how the hell did he change his clothes so fast?
Whenever I think of Billy Zane, I always just think of Zoolander now. It's so fair. Listen to your friend Billy Zane. He's a cool guy. And he is a cool guy. He doesn't get a huge amount to do. And I apologize that I got that wrong.
And I think the reason why he was in this because he actually auditioned to be Marty. I think. I might be making this up. I think he auditioned to be Marty. And obviously he didn't get it. And they went, oh, we got a character for you. Some weird lackey to Biff.
I like the idea that it's totally made up, but at least one person listens to this podcast who will just be like, they won't do any additional research, as we clearly haven't in this instance, and just be like, I'm just going to tell everyone I know for the rest of my life. It's like, oh, did you know that Billy Zane also read for Marty McFly, but he didn't get the roles, so he ended up playing Match? Yeah, his name's Match, and it's all be because of you. So fingers crossed that that actually happens.
You're welcome.
In terms of hates, I've already mentioned it, the middle section, really not a fan. And the fact that it's too close to home is also upsetting, just too bleak, the whole thing. To the occasional goofy tone in place of the first and third movie, where I think the overriding tone of those movies is charm above all else. I think that is replaced with goofy kind of comedy in this film. And number three, Griff and his future goons. I don't like the implants. I don't like the weird cadence in his speech. I don't like his silly hat, even if it is an implant. It's just a shame because I love him in every other version of that character. I just don't like Griff.
Oh, sorry. I was expecting...
I just burned through that. I do apologize.
And I was expecting a fourth and a fifth because you usually can't.
I know I always do, but I've spent so much time complaining about this film. I don't want to keep putting the boot in.
So it was really weird. Telescopic baseball bats.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that. It's bullshit.
Yeah, wasn't a fan of that. I can't get away from knowing the exact wrench size after 30 years.
Yeah, apparently not. Well, come on now. If you weren't kind of caught or hung up on like a really odd thing in this film, I would be disappointed. So yes, I'm more than happy for the wrench size to be added to the list of hate.
I suppose I hate it, but it means it was a good character choice from Michael J. Fox. I fucking hated Marty McFly Jr. Hated his whiny voice. I hated his mannerisms. I hated everything about. I hated his he's telling machines off and things like. I hated.
Again,
Marty.
That all leads into like the goofy nature of the comedy. I don't like. Obviously, we got caught up with the fact that it's weird that he plays his own daughter, but I completely agree. He is bad as basically Marty's son from the future. It's a weird, over-the-top performance, and I don't like it. And I think it sets the tone for the rest of the movie, a tone I'm not a massive fan of. So yes, that's a great chat. I was like, is he just going to keep picking inanimate objects as hate? I don't like the wrench. I don't like the baseball bat. I don't like the floor. It's like, oh my god. But yeah, no. I mean,
that hologram looks shit.
Yeah, well, I fundamentally agree with all of them. I really, I'm glad you brought up the DeLorean. That was essential. But I do think it is important that we mention the fact that Michael J. Fox's performance as the young Marty, whatever you want to call him, is just horrible. Yeah. It's just too over the top.
Number four, I still think it's not so much a hate, it's a weird. I still think it's weird that you've got this this non-familial relationship between Marty and Doc.
I'm not going down that route. I want to believe that it's sweet and wholesome. Like I said, number one is my love, I think the thing that drives this entire trilogy is their relationship. So I don't want to believe it's anything.
You don't want to go down the Mr. Miyagi
route. No, God damn you for bringing that up again. Again, I remembered it. Surely there are no alternative titles.
There's no alternative titles.
I went Back to the Future Part 2 everywhere.
Future Part 2 everywhere. Like,
so there wasn't even anywhere where it was just Back to the Future 2, for instance. It's always Back to the Future Part 2.
It was Back to the Future Part 2 when I went through. I love this section of alternate time titles because some of them can be weird, but the last two have just been
Dick Tracy and Back to the Future Part 2. The two times that I've remembered to bring it up, your section, and there have been no alternative titles. So maybe, I don't know, for the podcast next week, I'm not sure if there will be, but we'll get to that soon. Facts. There are plenty of facts. I'm sure you'll have to be quite
we're gonna have to be I guess
top three, sir. Top three.
Well, the plot line of George McFly being dead in 1985 was based entirely on Crispin Glover's refusal to do the sequel. So there could have been a whole storyline of, I don't know, George McFly maybe being imprisoned, or I'm making this shit
maybe they would have had that instead of the young Marty thing. Maybe the emphasis would have been on his position in 2015 rather than his son, which obviously, as we've just mentioned, would have been hugely preferable because we don't like to stuff with young Marty.
This is good because I read this and then I went back to look at it, and it is true. The ledge on the clock tower that Doc broke in Back to the Future is still broken in 2015. Like that level of detail in that is fucking fantastic, because you can see, you watch films that go back and do reshoots and all of a sudden the character is holding different guns and things like that. So the fact they kept this, that the ledge was broken, I thought was really, really good.
Well, that's one of the things I mentioned earlier, the fact that this movie has some of the best props of all time. If you want to call the DeLorean a prop, I'm not sure if it counts, but obviously that would be up there. We mentioned the trains and stuff. But surely Hill Valley has to be up there as one of the greatest sets of all time, because it is such a big part of the narrative in terms of its look, and it's kind of, going from, was it 1895? Is that the one?
Was
the
it
Old West?
1855? Maybe it was.
No, it'd definitely be older. Oh God, I'm sure I had it written down somewhere. I can't find it. I'll find it in a minute. But the fact that you go from the Old West to 1955 to 1985 to 2015, and the one consistent thing is Hill Valley, and it's that set and the way it keeps changing, and you notice all the different changes and the way that events in the past impact the future and stuff. It's, like, again, you talk about the stars of the movies. In terms of the stars of the trilogy, you can make an argument that the Hill Valley set is right up there.
Yeah. So I liked when Hill Valley was created for Back to the Future, they built the town in the pristine 1955 condition. They then shot the middle of the movie, then damaged it for 1985 town, and shot the beginning and end of the movie. When they decided to shoot Back to the Future Part 2, they had to clean the set up and restore it to the same condition it was in 1955. It cost more to rebuild than it cost to build it from scratch.
Amazing. Unbelievable.
And some of the items displayed in the front window of the Blast from the Past antique store. You had a Black & Decker Dustbuster, a Black & Decker Clothes Iron, Jaws 2, Dragnet, 1987's Dragnet, which was...
also, there was a lot of Black & Decker. Wasn't the hydration machine? That was Black & Decker, which I thought was weird. Because I always associate Black & Decker with, like, I don't know, tools, not home appliances, like, microwaves or hydrators, but whatever. They obviously tied down the hydration market early doors.
Nobody can hydrate a pizza like you, man. You had the NES game Burger Time, a Roger Rabbit.
That's a great game. That is a great game, Burger Time.
The
really
comedy album Trust Me by Hans Peterson, featuring Peterson impersonating President Jimmy Carter. Pac-Man Lunchbox, Smiley Faces from 1972, a Sanyo Orange phonosphere record player, JFK bust,
obviously.
Marty's denim jacket with Art in Revolution pin. So his denim jacket from the first film, they just had.
That's pretty cool.
And like I said, there's fucking hundreds of. I'm not going to go into all of these. So no. I haven't even scratched the surface, but I'll do one more. Darlene Vogel. She was Spike, the only girl in Griff's gang.
Oh yeah.
A red contact lens in her right eye as Griff's female gang member Spike. According to her, this idea developed because her own eye has two different colors. This is a condition called heterochromia erdem. Wesley Snipes has the same thing. So, because she didn't want to show the two different eye colors, she just had the red eye, which I
so,
thought.
so it almost looks fake, I suppose,
Yeah.
despite the fact that she did
Really
actually have two different color eyes.
They're
It's
all
kind
meant
of
to be cybernetic, aren't they?
Yeah, it kind of feels like the equivalent of like Willem Dafoe having to wear a goblin mask, despite the fact that he looks like a goblin. You know,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, well, that seems a bit unnecessary, but sure, we'll just go with it anyway. Is that it for facts?
Mate, I could go on forever.
No, I know. I appreciate you going forever. In terms of legacy, we mentioned it here. I actually think, despite the fact that it was maybe our most beloved of the trilogy when we were younger, it realistically is the worst of the trilogy. The fact that it's the most iconic props, I don't think that's in question. The use of the word almanac, we already said that. That only pops up in this film as far as I'm concerned. The first ever back-to-back sequels, I'm not sure if that's true, but it was to my mind at least, unless you've got another example.
Not earlier than that. No, these were
no. I can't think of anything where they filmed the two films back to back and released them like that. Not the best, but you could make an argument that this is the most beloved trilogy of all time. One that feels certainly like genuinely untouchable. You know, like a lot of films get remade and stuff. I don't think anyone's remaking Back to the Future. And I just don't think it's allowed.
This is the one where the director won't let it go. Nobody wants to see a remake except people that want to make money.
Yeah,
and exactly is the most. But as a trilogy, it's fantastic from start to finish. It's great. You could even like the things we've picked out with this film. You could forgive it if you're watching these films as a trilogy.
I think so. If you're watching it all as like one long 6-hour film, I think you'd be more forgiving of the faults of the second one for sure. I think you're right there.
Yeah, it is definitely untouchable as a trilogy, and I mean it holds its own. To the fact that you said nobody's remade it, nobody wants to remake it. Robert Zemeckis says you can remake it after I die. Kind of thing, like nobody is touching it.
I don't think anyone wants to see it either. And it's like, I don't think it is the best trilogy, but what you get with most trilogies is you get like, I know we picked this film apart, but people still love this film. And I don't think there's necessarily like, there's no bad film in a trilogy. Like this is the weakest, but let's be clear, that's kind of, you know, with caveats, with asterisks all over it. It's still a perfectly decent, perfectly enjoyable film. It just has issues. But like you said, as a trilogy, everyone loves it. And I think even over time, people love it despite its faults because they just love the relationship. They love the back to... Sorry.
It's great to see the callbacks from the previous film, things like that. And it moves the story along at a brisk pace. And it does what it needs to do. Number two, because they filmed them back to back, number two did what it needed to do to recap the first film and move you on to the third film to give you a satisfying ending.
Yeah. And I think that is the thing. It does. The first one's so good, and whatever your faults, your concerns might be with 2 and 3, it does wrap up so nicely as well. Like it just works as a trilogy. Despite, like I said, not all the films work perfectly in and of themselves, but as a trilogy, it's better than the sum of its individual parts. I think. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things. It totally established a generation's view of what the future might be. I don't think that's in question at all. I think everybody, when they thought of the future, they thought of 2015.
Yeah.
But of course, that does give an issue to like recommending this film, which we'll get to in a moment. And if nothing else, it nailed the obsession that we have with nostalgia sequels. And I love the fact that they got so close to the Cubs winning their first World Series in 2016, 1 year off. Absolutely unbelievable. But again, obviously its legacy goes much further than that, but we only have so many hours in the day and we don't want to turn this into a 4-hour podcast. So in terms of score and soundtrack, obviously Alan Silvestri, again, one of the most famous main themes in cinema history. You literally only need to hear the first bar of the main theme and you know exactly what you're dealing with.
I absolutely love it. I think it is up there with like some of the John Williams scores. It is.
I think so.
Best.
I think you get it quicker. I think if you just hear bum and you just go bum bum, like you just know where it's going straight away. I don't think this movie is the best use of that main theme or of the score in general. Again, I think it's actually the weakest of the trilogy, but don't take it. It's still an absolutely unbelievable score. And Alan Silvestri, obviously he's done a whole host of, huge scores for huge movies. But unsurprisingly, I think he'll always be remembered as the guy who did Back to the Future.
I think he's one of the top 3, isn't he? You have John Williams, Alan Silvestri, and probably Danny Elfman. They're probably
and what's his name? Did Batman and all that jazz? The Dark Knight trilogy.
Danny Elfman.
No, not
the Dark Knight trilogy. Sorry.
Yeah. What's his name? He did like loads of sound, like for like 10 years. movie soundtracks just sounded like Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer.
Oh, Hans Zimmer, yeah.
Hans Zimmer, yeah. He's just been synonymous with kind of cinema. Like, he basically took over. But yeah, will he age as well as John Williams or even Danny Elfman? I'm not sure. But yeah, Alan Silvestri is definitely in that rarefied air. But even amongst his plethora of fantastic scores and soundtracks, Back to the Future is the killer, and it's going to be number one on his list.
Yeah.
In terms of video games, quite a few actually. There was a poorly received Back to the Future 2 for everything. But the NES, it basically came out for the Amstrad, Amiga, Sega, and stuff. It's by Imageworks, but it wasn't very good. Same for Back to the Future 3. There was another separate game by, I think a company was called LJN, but it's basically just Acclaim. But I think the one everyone remembers was Back to the Future 2 and 3. They were actually combined into one game for the NES. It was kind of rubbish again, but I think that's the one everyone remembers. It's just bizarre that for every other console, you had Back to the Future 2, and then you had Back to the Future 3. But then on the NES, you had Back to the Future 2 and 3 as one cartridge, which I thought was really strange. There was a Telltale game, but that's more of a continuation. I'm not sure if you remember that game. It was decent, but it was before Telltale really nailed the formula with The Walking Dead. I think it came out 2 years earlier, and it actually had the original voice cast come back to one extent or another, but it was continuing the story rather than retelling the films. I'm not sure if that counts. But I think they had the right idea, though. In terms of if you're going to carry on the story, that's the way to go. But if you're going to do an actual Back to the Future 2 game, what I would like to see is an arcade game that captures like the big moments from all three games. From like, what I'm thinking of is like peak Sega. I'm sure you've seen the arcade machine. It's been around for years. Is the Star Wars trilogy Sega arcade game?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hung around for donkey's years, and you can still find them now. And it's basically a really easy. It's just like an old-fashioned kind of stick with one button, and it just captures one or two key moments from all three films. And it's a really simplified way of like, listen, you don't need to be retold the story. Here's just cool moments with a really easy arcade-style control scheme. And I would like to see that for the whole Back to the Future trilogy. Just take one or two moments from each film and just make it a really straightforward arcade machine. Because if I want to get a retelling of Back to the Future, I prefer to just fucking watch Back to the Future, if truth be told.
For me, I would do it as do you remember the Die Hard trilogy on PS1?
Oh, great game. Great. Yeah. And Sega Saturn. That's why I played that game on the Sega Saturn.
Yeah, I'm a PS kid. It's going to be PS.
Oh, fair enough. I was a Sega kid, of course.
But I would do it like that, where I guess Back to the Future 1 would be a third person. Back to the Future 2 could be a driving game because you've got all the flying cars, things like that. Back to the Future 3 then could be a first-person shooter. I mean, basically, you're saying because ostensibly, Die Hard trilogy, was basically an arcade game just stretched out for home console. So it's basically the same idea. Yeah. Just this is the home console version versus the arcade equivalent. But yeah, it sounds like we're on the same page at least. Where each film is a different genre of game. So
that's a great shout.
That's the way I would see it now.
Yeah. I think we're both basically agreeing we don't want to see the story be told. We prefer to watch the movies. And if you're going to do it, it's got so many iconic moments. Why not just kind of put them on screen for just like cool little arcade levels, basically. Yeah, it sounds good. So in terms of scoring and recommendations, the recommendations, it was weird because I was talking to our friend Stephen Power, who was over from Ireland to watch, he was visiting for work over in Edinburgh. We ended up watching a bit of the rugby together. And I was talking about this film and he was saying like, he's got kids now. And it's like, does he get to show his kids like Back to the Future soon? But he said, is it going to be a problem with Back to the Future 2 specifically now, where 2015 is supposed to be the future, but it's actually in the past? 8
years ago.
Yeah, and by the time his kids watch it, it's like, wait, the future is 8 years ago, and why are there flying cars, but there's no flying cars? Is it just going to cause more confusion now? So I'm not sure if that impacts being able to recommend this movie, but realistically, I did recommend this movie just a few days ago when I found out one of the guys I work with hasn't seen any of the Back to the Future trilogy, which is a fucking crime. So I said, listen, you have to watch number one because it is legitimately as close to a perfect film as you might ever find. As for the sequels, I was like, dude, if you watch the first one, you're going to end up watching the other ones. They're not as essential, but you should still watch them.
There you go. You can't recommend this film. You recommend the trilogy.
Great shout.
You can't recommend just this film alone. You can't go, Back to the Future 2, yeah, I recommend it. No. Watch them all. You have to watch the trilogy. Mm-hmm. You can't just recommend this film as an individual. It can't be done.
It can't.
Be done.
No, it should. And the thing is, like we said, that the important thing is if you're watching as a trilogy, even though we could tell you there's reasons you shouldn't watch this film, and it does have its problems, the fact is, again, as a trilogy, this film is better as part of a trilogy than it is in and of itself. Yeah, 100%.
And that's what makes scoring a little difficult. Because
it does, doesn't it?
So, as a standalone film,
it's a 3.
It's a 3.
Yeah, as a trilogy, it's a 4.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Film, it's a 3. But as part of the trilogy, to give you the story, to recap the story of the previous film, and then to move on for the next film, to give you that, it's a 4.
Yeah, so, 100%. And I think it's actually essential to both the first and the third film. It allows the first and third films to be more nostalgic. The fact that you do have the really timey-wimey, and I'm not sure if that's the official term, but you have the really timey-wimey second film. It allows the first and third films to be at a slower pace, to be more character-based. So 100% agree with you. In and of itself, a 3-star film on the nose as part of the trilogy has to be seen as a 4-star. Yeah. And that might be the only movie that we will review twice as part of for itself and as part of a trilogy. But this is the one for sure.
But that's the problem, isn't it? We've covered sequels on this podcast, but we've never covered an actual trilogy story, start to finish.
Yeah. So, no, because we've when you think of some of the other trilogies, we haven't done the whole trilogy yet, but we've done Indiana Jones 1 and 2, we've done Temple of Doom, and we've done Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. And we didn't give Temple of Doom 2 reviews because it still works as a separate film, whereas this really does feel like it's just a continuation of the story. I mean, like we said at the start of this film is the end of the first film. And even the end of this film is the end of the first film. Yeah. They're so intertwined. The only film that can theoretically work on its own, you could theoretically watch Back to the Future Part 1 and walk the fuck away. You totally could, but you shouldn't, because as a trilogy, it's really charming. As I said earlier, it's more than the sum of its individual parts. And this movie in particular is a perfect example. Yeah. The individual part is a 3-star movie, but as part of the whole, it's elevated to 4-star
And it's status. So clever as part of the whole, how it intertwines with the different timelines 100%. With things like that. And yeah, I've questioned what would happen to old Biff if he went to the old, but for most of the part, it is a very clever time travel film where it all connects, it all delivers. So absolutely, again, you can't look at this as an individual. It's part of the trilogy. It's an integral part of the trilogy. As an integral part of the trilogy, it's a 4.
I love the idea. Some people listen to this. It's like, wait a minute, they just spent an hour and a half shitting on this film, and then they're giving it 4 stars. We've done enough to justify it. Go fuck yourself. It's 4 stars as part of the trilogy. So yeah, that's been Back to the Future Part 2. We will get around to Back to the Future Part 3, but before that, the episode 99. I can't believe
this is your choice now, isn't it?
This is my choice, and it's going to be an interesting one because Rob's only seen this movie once, and it was a long time ago. But we're doing Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, a movie which I've seen loads of times. I adore, but I literally now can't remember if it's a good film or a good film with bad bits. I feel like with a more critical eye, it's gonna be a very different way of watching this film, because I always just went, I just enjoy that film. Yeah. But then I asked myself, I was like, but is it good? I was like, I mean, it's fun. Yeah, but is it good? I don't know. So we'll find out next week.
I'm going to end the Back to the Future podcast with the only thing I can remember from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Of course, this is going to be something weird as fuck. It won't be any of the iconic moments. It won't be Cancel Christmas. Rob, what odd part of this movie did you remember?
I've seen this film once, but it sticks to my head, and I think I told somebody before, and I've got it down pat. Christian Slater is in this film.
Yeah, there we go. There's a good start.
Yeah, and he trips up Kevin Costner in a river, and he sings a rhyme, and for some reason that rhyme is in my head constantly. There was a rich man from Nottingham who tried to cross a river. Oh, what a dope! Slipped on a rope. Now look at him shiver.
Do you know what's amazing about that is that you've seen this film once and you know that song verbatim. I've probably seen this film 20 times. I could hardly remember that song being in the movie. So yeah, so it's going to be a very interesting look back at Robin Hood. Or, anyone else, if they're singing anything from Robin Hood, do you think it might be, I don't know, the song that was #1 for 27 weeks? Yeah. No, it was the fucking rhyme by Christian Slater. A side character. You are out of your mind. And I cannot wait to talk about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
I'm looking forward to
next week. No, I really am.
And then we're on episode 100 then, aren't we?
I know, it's absolutely insane. Yeah, and that's going to be an interesting one, but we'll get to that next week. Yeah. So yes, thank you for listening to us tear apart Back to the Future Part 2 before giving it 4 stars. And please do join us next week for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Thank you as always. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. It's your kids, Marty. We've got to do something about your kids. I'm cutting that. That was a terrible one.
No, you have to keep it now. You have to keep it. And this. This is now the end of the podcast. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Darry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Hey, you guys!